Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the English Globe podcast, where we explore everything you need to know about learning English in ways that are both practical and enjoyable. My name is Adam, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you today. I want to extend a warm welcome to each of our listeners, whether you're joining us for the first time or if you're one of our regulars. We appreciate that you've taken the time to tune in. Here at the English Globe, our mission is to help make English learning accessible and fun for everyone, no matter where you are on your language journey.
Hello everyone, I'm Julia, and I'm really excited about today's episode. We're diving into a topic that's a bit different from what people might think of when it comes to language learning, but it's one that I think can completely change the way you feel about studying English. So, Adam and I want you to picture this. Instead of sitting down with a textbook and memorizing endless lists of vocabulary, what if learning English felt as fun as playing a game with your friends? What if you could improve your skills through activities that make you forget you're even studying because you're having such a good time?
Exactly, Julia. You know, a lot of people think that learning English, or any language, has to be something that's strict, structured, and even a bit tedious. They imagine it involves a lot of reading, memorization, grammar drills, and maybe even a bit of stress. And while, yes, there's certainly value in structured learning, we're here to tell you that there's a different approach, one that might just surprise you. Today, we're going to talk about using games and fun activities to learn English. And we're not just talking about simple, childish games. We're talking about creative, engaging activities that can help you practice your English skills in a more natural, enjoyable way.
Absolutely, Adam. Learning through games isn't just for young children. It's a method that works well for all ages and all learning levels. When we engage in games or activities, we're actually using the language in ways that feel real and meaningful, which is incredibly helpful for learning. Think about it. When you're playing a game, you're interacting, communicating, and responding on the spot. You're fully focused and enjoying yourself, and because of that, your brain is more likely to absorb and remember new information. The experience is active rather than passive, which makes it easier to recall what you've learned. And because games are usually interactive and social, they give you that valuable practice in a more relaxed, supportive environment.
Exactly, Julia. And here's something interesting. Research has shown that when we're enjoying ourselves, our brains are much more receptive to learning. Games and activities create an environment where we're not just sitting back and listening or reading, we're actively participating. This kind of engagement not only makes learning more memorable, but also reduces the pressure of getting it right. When we're playing a game, we're not as worried about making mistakes because, well, that's just part of the game. We might even laugh at our mistakes, which helps to take away that feeling of stress or self-consciousness that sometimes holds learners back.
Exactly, Adam. And that's something we'll be talking about a lot today. By removing that fear of making mistakes, games create a safe space where you feel free to try new words, experiment with sentences, and even use expressions you might not usually use. It's a chance to practice in a way that feels comfortable and natural. And for English learners, especially beginners, that's a huge confidence boost. Plus, learning through games lets you work on different skills simultaneously. For example, a game might help you improve your vocabulary, listening skills, and even your speaking fluency, all at the same time.
Right. And we've put together a list of different types of games and activities that we'll go through in today's episode. We're going to cover games that build your vocabulary, others that strengthen your listening and speaking skills, and even some that can help with grammar and sentence structure. And these aren't games that require fancy equipment or a classroom setting. Many of these are easy to try at home, with a friend, or even on your own. So, by the end of this episode, you'll have a toolkit of ideas that you can use to make English learning part of your daily routine, without feeling like it's just another task on your to-do list.
Exactly, Adam. We're all about making learning feel effortless and enjoyable, and we're here to remind everyone that language learning is about using the language, not just memorizing it. Games help you do that by immersing you in situations where you have to think on your feet, react, and communicate. They offer a kind of learning experience that you just can't get from a textbook. So, whether you're a complete beginner or someone who's been learning English for a while, today's episode is for you. We want to show you that learning English can be so much more than just studying. It can be something you look forward to, something you can share with others, and something that feels genuinely rewarding.
Well said, Julia. So, for all our listeners out there, if you're someone who finds traditional studying a bit daunting, or if you just want to add a bit more excitement to your English practice, this episode is definitely for you. We hope that by the end of today's podcast, you'll feel inspired to give these games a try, and maybe even discover a new approach to learning that fits you better. And remember, English learning doesn't have to be perfect or serious all the time. It can be full of laughter, creativity, and discovery.
That's right, Adam. Learning a language is a journey, and it should be a journey you enjoy every step of the way. So, if you're ready, let's dive into today's topic and explore how games and activities can help you build confidence, improve your skills, and have a great time while doing it. Grab a notepad if you'd like, and get ready to discover how fun English learning can really be.
All right, now that we've set the stage, let's dive deeper into why games and activities are such powerful tools for learning English. Many people think of language learning as something that's only about books, grammar exercises, and strict rules. But today, we want to show you a different approach, a fun and interactive way to build your English skills through games. Julia, wouldn't you say that one of the best things about games is how they make learning feel less like work?
Absolutely, Adam. When you think about it, games add a layer of enjoyment to learning that makes it feel completely different. Instead of just memorizing words or focusing on perfect grammar, games allow us to use the language naturally without even realizing we're practicing. By turning English practice into something playful, we're helping our minds engage in a way that's not only fun, but also effective. And it's really interesting because, scientifically speaking, when we enjoy what we're doing, we tend to remember things better.
Exactly, Julia. I think that's a key point. Studies have shown that when we're relaxed and having fun, our brains are actually more receptive to new information. Games activate parts of the brain associated with creativity, memory, and problem solving. This isn't just about learning English. It's about creating an environment where we feel comfortable, where mistakes don't matter as much, and where our natural curiosity can take over. And let's be honest, if learning feels like a chore, it's hard to stay motivated, right?
Right. And games make learning something you look forward to. Imagine if your English practice could feel like a break from your daily routine rather than something you have to do. Games bring a level of excitement that you just don't get from traditional studying. And even better, games often mimic real-life situations, so they prepare you to use English in real conversations. For instance, if you're playing a guessing game where you have to describe something without saying its name, you're practicing using descriptive language, something that's so useful in everyday conversations.
That's a great example, Julia. And I think another huge benefit is that games allow us to practice vocabulary and phrases in a way that sticks. Let's talk about one of my favorites, vocabulary cards. I know it sounds simple, but using flashcards can be a really powerful way to build your word bank. You can even turn it into a game by trying to remember as many words as possible in a set amount of time, or by challenging a friend to see who can get the most right. It's amazing how a simple change, like adding a time limit or making it competitive, can make learning vocabulary more exciting.
Yes. Vocabulary cards are a fantastic example. You can use them alone or with a friend, which makes it a flexible way to learn. And if you don't have physical cards, there are so many apps and websites that offer digital flashcards too. But moving beyond flashcards, there's another fun game I often recommend called 20 Questions, or just a guessing game. It's simple. You think of an object, a person, or an animal, and the other person has to guess what it is by asking yes or no questions. This kind of game encourages you to think about how to describe something indirectly, which really improves your ability to explain and communicate clearly in English.
I love that game, Julia. It's a fun way to practice vocabulary, and it helps with critical thinking too. When you're asking questions and trying to figure out the answer, you're working on forming sentences and using different types of words naturally. Plus, because it's a guessing game, there's an element of suspense and surprise, which makes it engaging. You're learning without even realizing it. And for beginners, it's a fantastic way to practice forming simple questions and answers.
Exactly, Adam. And speaking of suspense, one of the most engaging games for English practice is charades. For anyone who might not know, charades is a game where one person acts out a word or phrase without speaking, while the others try to guess what it is. It's a great activity for English learners because it gets you thinking about how to communicate ideas using actions, which is such an important skill in language. Sometimes, if you're struggling to find the right word, acting it out can actually help you remember it better.
Charades is such a great suggestion, Julia. It's fantastic for practicing verbs and actions especially, because you have to think about what you're doing and then put it into words. Plus, it's just fun, and that fun factor really lowers any pressure you might feel about making mistakes. It's okay if you don't get it perfect the first time. The point is that you're practicing, engaging with the language, and using your creativity, all at the same time. And what's great about charades is that it's something you can play with friends, family, or classmates, which makes it a social activity too.
Yes, and that social aspect is so important. When you're learning English in a social setting, like a game, you're more likely to feel comfortable experimenting with new words or phrases. If you're playing a game with friends, you're not just practicing English, you're practicing how to communicate naturally and confidently with others. So if you make a mistake, it's no big deal because everyone is learning and having fun together. Games help create a supportive environment, which is so crucial for building confidence.
And I think that's a perfect point, Julia. Confidence really is key. So many people feel nervous about speaking in English because they're afraid of making mistakes or sounding awkward. Games are a way to break down those barriers because, when you're playing, everyone's focused on the game itself, not on perfect pronunciation or grammar. You're practicing language in a context that feels authentic, not artificial. And by the time you've played a few rounds, you realize that you're speaking more comfortably and naturally.
Exactly, Adam. And let's not forget that games also give us a sense of progress. When you're able to guess the right word or win a game, you feel a sense of accomplishment. That positive feeling reinforces the learning process and keeps you motivated to continue. It's like you're achieving little milestones in your English journey, and that sense of success encourages you to keep going. Plus, it's a great way to track your improvement over time. If you play the same game regularly, you'll notice how much quicker and more confident you get with each session.
And that's such a satisfying feeling, Julia. When learning feels like play, you want to come back to it again and again. And remember, these are just a few examples. Games like vocabulary cards, guessing games, and charades are easy to set up and adapt to different levels, but there are so many others to explore. And the beauty of it is that you don't need a lot of resources to get started. Many of these activities can be done with things you already have at home, or you can even create your own versions of them.
Yes, the options are endless, and you can get creative with it. If you're learning with a friend, you can make up your own games or adjust the rules to suit your level. The important thing is that you're engaged, using the language, and having fun. So, if you're a beginner and traditional studying methods haven't worked for you, try switching things up with some games and activities. You might just find that learning English can be one of the most enjoyable parts of your day.
Absolutely, Julia. Learning a language should never feel like a burden. It should be something that excites you, something that fits seamlessly into your daily life. And with games, you're not just building vocabulary or grammar, you're building a love for the language, which is perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. So, for all our listeners out there, we hope this has inspired you to think differently about how you approach English learning. Give these games a try and see how they can transform your practice into something genuinely enjoyable. All right, Now that we've talked about the benefits of using games and activities to make English learning more enjoyable, let's dive into the different types of games that can help with specific language skills. We'll start with vocabulary games because, as we all know, building a strong vocabulary is the foundation of any language. So, Julia, what are some of your favorite games to help students learn and practice vocabulary?
Great question, Adam. One of the first games that comes to mind is Pictionary. It's such a classic, and it's surprisingly effective for English learners at all levels. In Pictionary, players take turns drawing a word while the other players try to guess what it is. What's wonderful about this game is that it forces you to think creatively and come up with ways to represent words visually. For instance, if the word is sunshine, you might draw a sun, maybe some clouds, and rays shining down. This game helps you connect words with images, making it much easier to remember vocabulary. Plus, it's a group activity, so it's a lot of fun to play with friends or classmates.
Absolutely, Julia. Pictionary is a fantastic way to learn new words because it's visual, interactive, and social, so it engages different parts of the brain. Another vocabulary game I like is word matching. This one can be as simple or as complex as you want. You can create cards with pairs of related words, like synonyms or opposites, or match words with their definitions. It's a great way to reinforce meanings and connections between words. For example, you could have the word happy on one card and joyful on another, and the goal would be to find and match those two cards. Not only is it useful for building vocabulary, but it also helps with memory and concentration.
That's a great one, Adam. And what's nice about word matching is that it can be adapted to different themes or levels. You can focus on food vocabulary one day, and maybe on action verbs the next. Another fun option is crossword puzzles, which I think is a classic for a reason. In a crossword, you have to read clues and come up with the right words to fit into the puzzle. This type of game encourages you to think critically about vocabulary and spelling, and it's especially useful for visual learners who like to see words laid out. You can find crossword puzzles in newspapers, online, or even make your own based on the words you want to practice. And the best part? You can do it alone or with a friend.
Yes, crossword puzzles are perfect for those who enjoy a bit of a challenge. They really make you think about how words connect to each other, and solving a puzzle feels like an accomplishment. I think these types of vocabulary games can make learning feel a lot less overwhelming and more like an exploration. Now, moving on, let's talk about speaking games, which are crucial for building confidence in using English out loud. When we think about language, it's not just about knowing words. It's about being able to use them effectively in conversations. So, Julia, what's a speaking game that you recommend? Cole.
One speaking game that I really enjoy introducing is Two Truths and a Lie. It's a game where each player says 3 statements about themselves, 2 that are true and 1 that is false. The others have to guess which statement is the lie. It's simple, but it works wonders for helping students practice speaking. The game encourages storytelling, as players often try to come up with interesting or unexpected details to make the lie sound believable. This can help with fluency, as you're speaking in full sentences, and it also gives you a chance to listen and respond, which are both essential parts of communication.
Two Truths and a Lie is a great choice, Julia. It allows players to be creative while also building vocabulary and sentence structure in a fun way. And, because it involves sharing personal details, it's a natural way to get to know each other better. Another speaking game I'd recommend is called roleplay. It's where you create different scenarios, like ordering food at a restaurant, checking into a hotel, or asking for directions, and then act them out as if they were real-life situations. This game is especially useful because it gives learners a chance to practice specific phrases and questions they'll actually use in real life. It also helps reduce the fear of making mistakes because you're playing a part, not just speaking as yourself.
Yes, roleplay is such a versatile game because you can create scenarios for almost any situation, from everyday interactions to more formal settings. It's a safe way to practice conversations you might find challenging in real life. And it's also a great way to build confidence, as you get used to speaking English in various contexts. Another speaking game I find effective is called Guess the Word. One person has to describe a word without saying it directly, and the other players have to guess what it is. This game requires you to think on your feet, as you need to find different ways to explain the word. It's excellent for building descriptive language skills.
That's a fantastic one, Julia. Guess the Word helps with vocabulary recall and improves your ability to think creatively in English. Now, let's move on to listening games, which are just as important. Listening is often one of the most challenging skills to master in a new language, but games can make it a lot easier. Julia, do you have a favorite listening game?
One of my favorites is the classic game Simon Says. It's a simple game, but it's surprisingly effective for improving listening skills. The way it works is that one person, usually the leader, gives instructions like, "Simon says touch your nose," and everyone has to follow the instruction. But only if the leader says Simon says at the beginning. If the leader just says touch your nose without Simon says, and someone follows the instruction, they're out. It's a fun way to practice careful listening and quick responses, and because it involves physical actions, it's also great for kinesthetic learners who learn best by moving and doing.
Simon Says is a wonderful game for honing listening skills, Julia. It trains you to pay close attention to details and follow directions precisely. Another great listening activity is an audio-based guessing game. You could play sound clips or short stories and then ask questions about what was heard. This encourages active listening, as players need to remember details from what they heard. It could be something simple, like identifying sounds, or more complex, like recalling key points from a story. And for those who love music, you could even use songs, where listeners have to fill in missing lyrics or identify words in the lyrics.
That's a fantastic idea, Adam. Using songs is especially effective because music naturally draws people in, making it easier to focus and remember. Listening to music or even short audio stories is a great way to improve comprehension skills. You can start with slow, clear songs, and once you feel more confident, move on to faster songs or more complex stories. This helps you adapt to different accents, rhythms, and speeds in spoken English. And, of course, if you enjoy the song, you're more likely to listen to it multiple times, which reinforces your learning.
Absolutely, Julia. Songs and stories give us a natural rhythm and flow to follow, which is so helpful for improving overall comprehension. And listening games, like all of the ones we've discussed, bring an element of fun and challenge that keeps you engaged. You're not just listening passively, you're actively trying to pick up information. So, to recap, we have vocabulary games like Pictionary and word matching for building word knowledge, speaking games like Two Truths and a Lie and roleplay for boosting confidence, and listening games like Simon Says and audio-based guessing games for enhancing listening skills.
Exactly, Adam. And what's really wonderful about all these games is that they can be done at home, with friends, or even by yourself in some cases. They're versatile and adaptable, which means you can make them as challenging or as easy as you need. And they're a fantastic way to build the habit of practicing English regularly because you're likely to look forward to these activities. You're learning, but it doesn't feel like traditional study time. It feels like play.
Well said, Julia. Learning English through games is about making the process as enjoyable and effective as possible. When you engage in these activities, you're not just practicing, you're building a love for the language and developing skills that will stay with you. So, for all our listeners, don't hesitate to try out these games and make them a part of your English learning routine. You might just find that your progress improves without even realizing it. Now that we've covered some games, let's move on to another area that can make learning English both engaging and practical: interactive activities. These are activities that encourage real-time communication and collaboration, which are crucial for developing confidence and fluency. Let's start with a simple but powerful technique: conversation starters. Now, a conversation starter is just a topic or question designed to get people talking, but it can be incredibly useful for building speaking skills. For instance, Asking something like, if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go and why? Opens up a lot of possibilities for discussion. Not only does it encourage the speaker to express their thoughts, but it also gives them a chance to practice forming longer sentences and exploring new vocabulary.
That's a great example, Adam. Conversation starters are perfect because they're not overly complicated, but they encourage you to dig a little deeper and express yourself. And the great thing is that they're adaptable. You can start with simpler questions like, what's your favorite food? And gradually move to more complex topics. Another one I love is, if you could have dinner with any famous person, living or dead, who would it be? This question encourages storytelling because the speaker might explain why they chose that person, share what they admire about them, and even imagine what they would talk about. When people speak about things that genuinely interest them, they tend to forget their nerves, making it easier to practice speaking.
Exactly, Julia. And conversation starters are so versatile. They can be used in pairs, small groups, or even as a fun icebreaker in a larger class setting. They help learners focus on the content of what they're saying, rather than just the mechanics of speaking. Another great tip is to add a little challenge, like setting a timer. For example, see if you can talk about your favorite movie for 1 full minute without stopping. Timed activities like this encourage learners to think quickly, organize their thoughts, and expand on details, which is an excellent practice for fluency.
Yes, and speaking of groups, let's talk about some group activities that are both fun and effective for learning English. One activity I highly recommend is debate games. In a debate, learners split into teams, and each team takes a side on a topic, like books are better than movies, or cats make better pets than dogs. Each team has to come up with reasons to support their position, and then they present their arguments to the other team. This activity does more than just improve speaking skills. It also builds confidence, teaches critical thinking, and encourages students to listen carefully to others' points of view. Plus, because it's competitive, it often brings out a lot of enthusiasm.
I love debate games, Julia. They're challenging, but they're also incredibly rewarding because they push you to think in English, organize your thoughts, and present them clearly. And even if it's just a friendly debate, there's something about the competitive aspect that motivates learners to participate fully. Another group activity that's a bit lighter but still effective is the word relay. In this game, you split into 2 or more teams, and each team has to come up with words in a certain category, like colors, animals, or countries, as quickly as possible. For example, one person says blue, then the next person has to name another color, like red, and it goes on. The goal is to keep the relay going without repeating words. This activity helps with vocabulary recall and encourages teamwork, as everyone has to stay alert and think quickly.
The word relay is fantastic, especially because it's fast-paced and can be adapted for all levels. You could make it more challenging by choosing specific topics like verbs related to cooking or words that describe emotions. It's a great way to review vocabulary in a way that feels dynamic and engaging. And while these group activities require teamwork, they also build individual confidence, as each person plays an essential role in the team's success. Group activities like these create a sense of camaraderie and make learning feel like a shared experience, which is so valuable when studying a language.
Absolutely, Julia. Now let's move on to digital activities, which have really opened up a lot of exciting possibilities for English learners. With so many apps and online platforms available, learning English has never been more accessible. One of the most popular platforms is Duolingo, which offers a variety of interactive exercises designed to help users practice vocabulary, grammar, and even pronunciation. What's great about Duolingo is that it uses a game-like format where you can earn points, track your progress, and even compete with friends. It's perfect for beginners because the lessons are short and manageable, so you can easily fit them into a busy day.
I agree, Adam. Duolingo is especially good for people who are just starting out or who want to reinforce their basics. The app's structure makes it feel like a game, so it's motivating to keep going. Another platform I really like is Kahoot. This is actually designed for group learning, but it works well for English practice too. Teachers or learners can create quizzes on any topic, grammar, vocabulary, idioms, and then invite others to join in. During the game, everyone answers questions in real time, and points are awarded based on how quickly and accurately you answer. It's fantastic for group practice because it's both educational and fun, and it brings out everyone's competitive side. Plus, you can play it from anywhere as long as you have internet access.
Yes, Kahoot is fantastic for reviewing what you've learned and for group practice sessions. It's especially useful in classrooms or online study groups, where you want everyone to participate actively. And there's also Quizlet, which is more of a flashcard-based platform, but offers interactive ways to study vocabulary, grammar, and phrases. You can create your own study sets or use sets made by others, and then practice with games like Match or Gravity. These games help reinforce vocabulary in a way that's both interactive and visual. And because Quizlet is customizable, you can focus on the words and topics that are most important to you.
Good point, Adam. Quizlet is a wonderful tool because it allows you to tailor your learning experience, which can be really helpful if you have specific goals. And, let's not forget, there are even video-based platforms like YouTube that have English learning content tailored for every level. There are channels that focus on vocabulary, pronunciation, and even specific topics like travel English or business English. Watching videos allows learners to hear authentic English while also seeing visuals, which can make it easier to understand. Many learners find this type of content very engaging, and it's free and available anytime.
That's a great reminder, Julia. Video platforms like YouTube give learners a chance to hear different accents, see facial expressions, and learn about various cultural contexts. And finally, I'd mention that there are even mobile games designed to help with language learning. For example, apps like Memrise combine short video clips with vocabulary practice, so you get exposure to everyday spoken language and pronunciation in a very engaging format. And there are language exchange platforms where you can connect with native speakers to practice in real conversations.
Exactly, Adam. Memrise is especially good for those who want to hear real spoken language, and the short clips make it easy to squeeze in practice whenever you have a few spare minutes. And language exchange platforms are wonderful because they give you a chance to practice with real people, which is the most authentic way to learn. Many of these platforms even have built-in correction features, so you can receive feedback from native speakers. This not only helps with accuracy, but also gives you the confidence to try out what you've learned in a supportive environment.
So, to sum up, interactive activities like conversation starters, group games, and digital platforms provide a wide variety of ways to learn English. These activities are flexible, fun, and effective, whether you're practicing alone, with a friend, or in a group. They allow you to immerse yourself in English, engage in real communication, and build skills in a way that feels less like study and more like a fun challenge. For all our listeners out there, don't hesitate to explore these activities and find the ones that work best for you. You might be surprised at how much you can learn while having a great time.
Well said, Adam. The beauty of these activities is that they make learning feel like play, and that's when language truly becomes alive. Remember, learning English isn't just about studying, it's about enjoying the process, connecting with others, and discovering new ways to express yourself. We encourage all our listeners to try out these interactive activities and see just how engaging English practice can be.
Now that we've explored vocabulary, speaking, and listening games, let's dive into how games can actually help improve grammar and sentence structure, a key part of learning English that many find challenging. We all know that grammar can sometimes feel like one of the most difficult aspects of learning a new language. With all the rules, exceptions, and little details, it can be overwhelming, especially for beginners. But what if we approached grammar in a way that's both interactive and enjoyable? One way to do that is through grammar games. I'd like to start with a classic example, Grammar Bingo. Just like traditional bingo, this game uses a bingo board, but instead of numbers, each square has a different grammar structure or part of speech on it. For instance, one square might say past tense verb, another might say adjective, and so on. The teacher or leader then calls out sentences, and players mark off the grammar structures they hear. It's a fun, engaging way to recognize different grammar forms in real time, and it really helps reinforce grammar patterns without making it feel like rote memorization.
I love grammar bingo, Adam. It's such a versatile game too because you can change it up depending on what grammar points you want to focus on. And the nice thing about games like this is that they help learners identify grammar in context, not just as isolated rules. When students hear a sentence and have to think about what's in it, they're actually practicing two skills at once: listening and grammar recognition. It makes the learning process smoother and helps them recognize these structures when they encounter them in real conversations or texts. Another great game for grammar is something I call sentence building blocks. In this game, you take words or phrases written on cards or blocks and arrange them to form correct sentences. It sounds simple, but it's incredibly useful for practicing sentence structure. By physically arranging the blocks, learners get hands-on experience with word order, which is especially helpful for those tricky parts of English, like placing adjectives before nouns or choosing the right tense.
That's a fantastic game, Julia. Sentence building blocks is especially useful for those who are working on sentence structure. English has its own specific order for adjectives, verbs, and nouns, and this game helps learners get a feel for that order by experimenting with it directly. Plus, by playing with the blocks, they can visually see how the sentence changes if they put words in different places, which makes it a powerful way to understand grammar rules practically rather than just reading about them. Another game I think is helpful for sentence building is fill-in-the-blank stories. This is where you create a story with several blanks in it and give players a list of words they can use to fill those blanks. For example, you might have a sentence that reads, "The blue cat blew in the tree." Students have to choose words like black or sleeping to complete the sentence. Not only does this reinforce correct word choice, but it also shows them how different words can alter the sentence's meaning.
Yes, Adam. Fill-in-the-blank stories are brilliant. This type of game really brings out the creative side of learners, as they get to play with different words and see how small changes can make a sentence more descriptive or even humorous. I think it's also great for reinforcing articles like a, an, and the, which can be tough for English learners to use correctly. For instance, you could have a story where the student has to decide whether to say a dog or the dog, depending on what fits the story. Games like this make grammar feel less like rules to memorize and more like tools they can use to create interesting sentences.
Exactly, Julia. And speaking of articles and sentence structure, let's talk about games that focus on practicing tenses, which is another challenging area for learners. One of my favorite games for practicing verb tenses is called Time Travel Stories. Here's how it works. Each player takes a turn telling a story, but the twist is that every sentence they add has to be in a different tense. So, for instance, the first player might say, "Yesterday I visited the park," in the past tense. The next player then has to continue, "Today I am walking to the park," in the present tense. The following player might say, "Tomorrow I will go to the beach," in the future tense. This game helps learners think on their feet and use different tenses naturally, while also reinforcing the structures for past, present, and future. And it's a lot of fun as the story becomes more and more unpredictable.
I love time travel stories, Adam. It's such a creative way to practice tenses without it feeling repetitive or mechanical. By switching tenses in each sentence, learners are actively comparing the forms and learning to recognize when each tense is appropriate. And since everyone has to follow along and build on what the previous person said, it keeps everyone engaged and listening carefully. Another fun game for sentence structure, especially for practicing correct word order, is sentence scramble. You take a sentence, break it into individual words, and scramble them. The players then have to arrange the words in the correct order to form a coherent sentence. For instance, you could give them the words quickly, dog, ran, home, and they'd need to figure out that the correct sentence is, the dog ran home quickly. It sounds simple, but it really challenges learners to think carefully about English sentence structure, and it's also great for understanding adverb placement.
Sentence scramble is fantastic, Julia, especially because it's adaptable to different levels. You can start with simpler sentences for beginners and gradually introduce more complex ones. It's a great way to practice not just sentence structure, but also comprehension, because learners need to understand the meaning of the words to decide on the correct order. And because the game is like solving a puzzle, it's actually fun to play. It makes grammar feel like a challenge instead of a chore.
Exactly, and the puzzle aspect makes it very rewarding when you finally put the sentence together correctly. Another interesting grammar game that I find very effective is tense transformation relay. This is a game where you start with a sentence in one tense, like she is eating lunch, and each player has to change it to a new tense in turn. The next person might say, she ate lunch, in the past tense, and then the next person could say, she will eat lunch, in the future tense, and so on. This helps learners practice each tense in quick succession, which reinforces their understanding of how each one changes the meaning slightly. It's especially useful for learning those irregular verb forms, which can be tricky.
Tense transformation relay is excellent for quick thinking practice, and I like how it makes learners focus on verb conjugation and sentence structure all at once. By cycling through different tenses in real time, they get a strong sense of how English verbs change depending on the context. And, as you mentioned, it's perfect for those tricky irregular verbs. Learning these through repetition in a fun way really sticks. These kinds of games are fantastic for building confidence because learners are practicing grammar directly, but they're doing it in a way that doesn't feel like studying. It feels like playing.
Yes, and when grammar feels fun, it's less intimidating, and learners are more likely to remember what they've practiced. Grammar games like these allow students to approach language playfully, experiment with sentence construction, and really feel how the rules work in a natural way. And they encourage speaking, listening, and collaboration, making them a comprehensive learning experience. So for our listeners who may have been struggling with grammar, give these games a try. You may be surprised by how much you can learn while simply having fun.
Well said, Julia. Games like Grammar Bingo, Sentence Building Blocks, and Tense Transformation Relay offer a great mix of engagement and learning, transforming grammar from a set of abstract rules into practical skills that you can use right away. So, if you're looking to build your grammar knowledge and become more comfortable with sentence structure, these games are a fantastic way to start. Remember, language learning doesn't have to be just memorization. It can be interactive, dynamic, and fun.
Now let's take everything we've discussed a step further. So far, we've talked about games to build vocabulary, improve listening, and strengthen grammar. But how can we use games to prepare for real-life situations in English? One powerful way to do this is through roleplay. Role-playing is a type of game where you act out scenarios that might happen in everyday life, and it's an incredibly effective way to practice English because it gives you the chance to think on your feet and use the language in a context that feels real. For instance, let's imagine you're at a restaurant and you want to order a meal. In a role-play activity, you and a friend could take turns acting as the customer and the server. The customer has to ask questions about the menu, make choices, and say what they want to order. The server has to respond, make recommendations, and check if the customer needs anything else. By practicing this way, you're not only learning the specific phrases you might need, but you're also building confidence to use them naturally in an actual restaurant setting.
Absolutely, Julia. Role-playing scenarios like ordering food, asking for directions, or even checking into a hotel can be so valuable. These are situations where knowing the right vocabulary and sentence structure can make a huge difference. But it's also about becoming comfortable speaking up and navigating interactions. For example, asking for directions might sound simple, but when you're in an unfamiliar place, it's easy to feel anxious. Practicing this through roleplay helps you prepare for those moments. You get used to saying things like, "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to?" or "Is this the right bus to?" And it's not just about memorizing these sentences. By practicing them with someone, you learn how to respond if the other person asks you questions or gives you directions that you need to follow.
Yes. And another great thing about roleplay is that it allows you to practice adapting to different situations. For instance, you might practice ordering at a restaurant, and maybe one time the server says, "We're out of that dish today. Would you like to try something else?" This teaches you how to handle unexpected situations, just like in real life. Role-playing builds what we call situational fluency, the ability to use language smoothly in changing circumstances. And as you gain confidence through practice, you start to feel more prepared to handle new and unpredictable situations in English. This is why roleplay isn't just for beginners. Even more advanced learners find it helpful for building confidence in spontaneous conversations.
Exactly, Julia. And let's not forget that games like roleplay aren't limited to just two people. They can also be done in groups, which can add even more excitement. For example, you could have a group scenario where everyone has a different role, like a travel agent, a tourist, or a local guide. Each person has to communicate with others to solve a problem or plan an itinerary, making it a fun way to practice English while using teamwork skills. Another idea for group practice is board games that have conversation prompts or real-life scenarios built into them. These types of games are specifically designed to simulate real-life English interactions. There are even board games out there that create scenarios such as negotiating a deal or planning a trip, where each player has to take turns responding to prompts and questions. Games like this allow learners to feel a bit of the pressure of real conversations, but in a relaxed and supportive setting, so they don't feel too overwhelmed.
Yes, Adam. I love board games that incorporate language learning because they really help to bring a level of unpredictability that mimics real life. For instance, there are games where players draw cards that give them situations to respond to. One card might say, "You're at the airport, and your flight has been delayed. What do you do?" Another card might ask, "Your friend invites you to a party, but you already have other plans. How do you politely decline?" These prompts encourage you to think on your feet and respond as naturally as possible, which is great practice for actual conversations. And since it's a game, it doesn't feel like a test. You can enjoy the process of figuring out how to respond even if it's challenging at first.
Now, while games and role-playing can make learning English more fun and interactive, it's true that they can come with some challenges too. One common issue I see with learners, especially those who are just starting out, is feeling shy or nervous about speaking up. Many people are worried about making mistakes or sounding awkward, and that can sometimes keep them from fully engaging in these types of activities. For instance, during a role-play activity, a learner might hesitate to speak out loud, afraid they'll say something wrong or use the wrong word. This fear is totally understandable, but the important thing to remember is that making mistakes is a natural and necessary part of learning any language. Games provide a space to practice without pressure, because there are no grades or tests. It's all about exploring and getting comfortable with the language.
Absolutely, Adam. And another challenge I've noticed is that sometimes people feel self-conscious about performing in front of others, especially when it's a group activity. They might worry that their pronunciation isn't perfect, or that they'll forget the right words, which can make them hesitant to participate. To help overcome this, I always encourage learners to try these activities at home first, either by themselves or with a trusted friend. Even practicing in front of a mirror can be beneficial. Imagine ordering food or asking for directions while looking at yourself in the mirror. It might sound a bit funny, but it can help you build confidence because you get used to hearing yourself speak English. Little by little, you become more comfortable, and then, when you're ready, you can start practicing with others in a small group setting.
That's a great tip, Julia. Practicing in a low-pressure environment is a wonderful way to build up to more challenging settings. Another helpful strategy is to focus on small goals. For instance, if someone is feeling too shy to speak during a game, they could set a goal to say just 1 or 2 sentences during the activity, rather than trying to speak the whole time. Starting small can make it easier to build confidence gradually. And for anyone who's afraid of making mistakes, I would say this: mistakes are actually a good sign that you're pushing yourself. Every time you make a mistake, you're giving yourself a chance to learn and grow. Think of it like learning to ride a bike. You might fall a few times, but that's part of the process, and as you keep practicing, it becomes easier and less intimidating.
Exactly, Adam. Mistakes show that you're actively trying, and each one is an opportunity to improve. Another thing that helps is setting up a routine of playing these games regularly. When you make it a habit, it becomes a normal part of your routine, and it feels less like a performance. And if you don't have a partner to practice with, there are plenty of online platforms and apps where you can connect with other English learners or even native speakers who enjoy language exchange. Some apps even have built-in games that let you practice speaking, listening, or role-playing with others. The great thing about practicing online is that you can do it from the comfort of your home, which often helps learners feel more relaxed and less self-conscious.
Yes, that's a fantastic point, Julia. Language exchange apps or online games are excellent options, especially for anyone who might feel too shy to practice face-to-face. And if anyone out there is still worried about speaking up, remember that everyone who's learning a new language goes through these same challenges. It's completely normal to feel nervous at first. The key is to keep trying, even if it feels difficult. And always remember, it's okay to start slow. Whether it's practicing by yourself, with a friend, or online, every bit of practice helps build confidence over time. The more you speak and listen, the more natural it becomes.
Exactly, Adam. To all our listeners, the important thing is to take the first step. Even if it's a small step, like saying a few words during a game, it's progress. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's how we learn. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There are people everywhere working to improve their English, and there's a whole community of learners and teachers ready to support you. So keep practicing, keep playing, and enjoy the process. You're doing great. Welcome back to the English Globe. Today we have a special guest with us who brings a wealth of experience in teaching English through games and activities. We're excited to welcome Emma, an experienced English teacher who's been working with students of all ages for over 10 years. Emma, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Julia and Adam. I'm thrilled to be here. I've always believed that learning English can be fun and interactive, and games are such a powerful way to bring the language to life for learners.
Emma, we'd love to hear from you about some of your favorite games and activities for learning English. Could you share a bit about what's worked best in your experience?
Of course. One of my favorite activities for teaching vocabulary is called Vocabulary Relay. This game works especially well with groups, but you can even try it with 2 people or play it by yourself. In Vocabulary Relay, I divide students into teams and give each team a set of vocabulary cards. The goal is for each team member to run to the board, pick a word card, and then describe the word to their teammates without saying it directly. It's like a combination of charades and verbal description, so students practice speaking and thinking about the meaning of words without translating in their heads. It really boosts their confidence in using English to explain concepts, which is a skill they can use in everyday conversations.
That sounds so engaging. It's such a great idea because they're not only practicing vocabulary, but also learning how to explain things in English. Have you noticed any particular benefits for students who play this game?
Absolutely, Julia. Vocabulary Relay really encourages students to be creative with their language. Since they can't just say the word, they have to come up with descriptions, synonyms, or even examples, which deepens their understanding of the vocabulary. Plus, because it's fast-paced, they start thinking in English rather than translating from their first language. This kind of active engagement also helps with memory retention. Students often remember the words better because they had to explain them in their own words and sometimes because they had fun or laughed during the activity.
That's fantastic, Emma. It's interesting how a game like that can also help students learn to think on their feet. Do you have any other favorite activities that are effective for practicing grammar or sentence structure?
Yes, for grammar, one of my go-to games is Sentence Building Race. In this activity, I provide each group with a mix of words and phrases on small cards, and they have to arrange them into correct sentences as quickly as they can. This game helps them practice grammar rules and sentence order, but it's also a lot of fun because there's a race element to it. I might give them a theme, like sentences about food or travel, which adds a bit of context so they get used to using grammar in real-life scenarios. The time limit adds a bit of excitement, and it encourages students to work together and correct each other's mistakes, which is a valuable learning experience.
I can see how that could be both challenging and enjoyable. The mix of teamwork and speed must make it really exciting for the students. And I love that they're practicing grammar without it feeling like a traditional lesson. Emma, do you find that students enjoy grammar more when it's taught this way?
Yes, Julia, definitely. Many students are intimidated by grammar at first, but when it's part of a game, they tend to relax and focus on the task rather than worrying about rules. They're actively working with the language rather than passively studying it, and they start to see grammar as something they can play with and manipulate. I often hear from students that they didn't even realize they were practicing grammar because they were so absorbed in the game. And that's the goal, to make learning enjoyable and impactful.
That's fantastic advice, Emma. Games really do create a comfortable environment for practicing more challenging aspects of English. Before we wrap up, do you have any recommendations for listeners who might be learning English on their own and want to use games for self-study?
Yes, definitely. For anyone learning on their own, I suggest using apps like Duolingo or Quizlet, which have game-based features that make learning vocabulary and phrases fun and interactive. You could also try doing some role-playing on your own. For example, pretend you're ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions. Even if it feels a bit silly at first, this kind of practice can be really helpful. Another game I recommend is creating a word ladder or grammar puzzle. You can write down sentences and cut them into pieces, then try to put them back together in the correct order. It's a simple but effective way to practice sentence structure and grammar.
Those are amazing tips, Emma. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and insights with us today. It's always great to hear from a dedicated teacher like you. I'm sure our listeners will find your ideas really helpful.
Thank you for having me. I hope everyone listening feels inspired to try out some games and have fun with their English learning journey.
And now, we're going to answer some questions from our listeners about using games and activities to learn English. We've received some great questions from all of you, and we're excited to discuss them. Let's start with our first question. What if I feel too shy to play games with others? Adam, what would you suggest for someone who feels this way?
That's a great question, Julia. Feeling shy is completely normal, especially when practicing a new language in front of others. If someone feels too shy, I would suggest starting with solo games or activities first. You could play vocabulary games on apps by yourself or practice role-playing scenarios in front of a mirror. For instance, imagine yourself ordering coffee or asking for directions. When you get comfortable, you can try these games with a close friend or family member. Gradually, as you gain confidence, playing games with a larger group will start to feel easier.
That's a good approach, Adam. Small steps can make a big difference. Our next question is, are there any games that can help me with pronunciation? This is a common question, especially for learners who want to improve their speaking skills.
Yes, pronunciation games can be very helpful. One activity I recommend is a game called Echo. In this game, you listen to a sentence or a word, and then you repeat it, trying to match the tone, speed, and pronunciation as closely as possible. You could do this with recordings from apps or videos on YouTube. Another fun game is to practice tongue twisters, like, "She sells seashells by the seashore." These phrases are challenging but great for building pronunciation accuracy and clarity.
Echo games and tongue twisters are wonderful for pronunciation practice. They're challenging but effective. Let's move to the next question, which is, can I use games to improve my English writing skills? Adam, do you have any tips for this?
Absolutely, Julia. There are several writing games that can make learning fun. One game I recommend is called Story Chain. This game works especially well with groups or partners, but you can also play it by yourself. In Story Chain, you start with a sentence to begin a story, and then each person adds a sentence to continue it. If you're practicing alone, you could write one sentence a day and build a story over a week. Another idea is to play word prompt stories, where you choose 5 random words and write a short story that includes each word. It's a creative way to expand vocabulary and improve sentence structure in writing.
That's a great idea, Adam. Creating stories with word prompts encourages creativity and helps learners practice writing in a fun, relaxed way. Here's another question from our listeners. What if I don't have anyone to play with? Can I still use games to learn English alone?
Yes, you absolutely can. Many games work perfectly well as solo activities. Apps like Duolingo, Memrise, or Quizlet have game-based learning you can do alone. You could also play guessing games with flashcards, practice pronunciation by repeating after videos, or play grammar games by creating sentences with specific rules. There are endless options, so even if you're studying alone, you can make it interactive and fun.
Wonderful. These are really helpful tips. And to all our listeners, remember that learning English doesn't have to be serious all the time. Playing games and engaging in fun activities is one of the best ways to improve while enjoying the journey. Thank you, Adam, for answering these questions, and thank you to all our listeners who sent them in. As we come to the end of today's episode on using games and activities to learn English, let's take a moment to recap the main benefits we've discussed. Games aren't just a break from traditional learning. They are powerful tools that make language practice enjoyable, memorable, and interactive. When we play games, we're engaging in a way that helps vocabulary stick in our minds, builds confidence with speaking, and gives us valuable real-life practice that translates to everyday conversations. Using games really helps us feel more comfortable in the language without even realizing we're studying.
Exactly, Julia. And to make things easier, we've looked at some great types of games that learners can try, each with its own benefits. For vocabulary, games like Pictionary, word matching, or vocabulary relay are excellent ways to actively use new words. Then, for speaking, role-playing, and games like Guess the Word build confidence by encouraging us to speak up and communicate ideas. And with listening games, such as Simon Says or using music clips, learners can improve their listening comprehension in a relaxed, fun way.
That's right, Adam. We also explored how some activities are perfect for practicing grammar and sentence structure, like grammar bingo and sentence building blocks. They might sound simple, but they bring an element of competition and excitement, which makes learning those rules easier to remember. And of course, role-playing and situational games are fantastic for preparing for real-life conversations. When you practice ordering food or asking for directions in a game, it feels so much more natural when you have to do it for real.
So true, Julia. And to everyone listening, we encourage you to try a few of these games and activities to see which ones work best for you. Remember, every learner is different, so it's all about finding what makes learning feel effective and enjoyable. You might start with a simple vocabulary game or dive into something interactive like a debate game. The important thing is to keep experimenting and find the activities that keep you motivated and engaged.
We want to thank all of you for joining us on today's episode of the English Globe. We hope you feel inspired to bring some games and activities into your English learning routine. Learning a language doesn't have to be all serious work. It can be fun, creative, and full of laughter too. Remember, every little bit of practice helps. So even 5 minutes of a game each day can make a big difference.
Absolutely, Julia. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes where we explore more tips and strategies for learning English. We'd also love to hear from you. Leave a comment sharing your favorite English learning games or let us know which ones you're excited to try. Building a community where we can all learn together makes the journey that much better.
That's right. Plus, when you share your own tips and games, you might be helping out a fellow learner who's looking for new ideas. Learning together makes us stronger and keeps us motivated. So stay curious, keep practicing, and don't be afraid to have some fun along the way.
Thanks again for listening, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep practicing, and remember, you're doing amazing. We'll be back with more tips, topics, and encouragement to support you on your journey to mastering English.
Take care, everyone, and happy learning. We'll see you in the next episode of the English Globe. Bye for now.